Hi, I'm Larry Mishler, and I'm back again to talk about photography before digital, and that means film. And today we're going to be looking at pro and semi-pro cameras and how that developed. And we're going to do this through Larry's lens. Well, today I'm going to approach this mainly from where my experience has been through photojournalism and through some commercial photography. As we had discussed before, this was the workhorse for a lot of the photojournalists. A lot of the people used this, and it was heavy. It was hard to use. And then came along the war. And many journalists went to either 35 millimeter or 2 1/4 twin lens reflex. Now we're going to talk about both of these, so let me start here first with the 35s. Everybody's heard of the camera, the Leica. Yeah, the Leica is the old thing. This is a 1F. Now this is I just discovered that this is a fairly rare camera. There was only 1,188 of these made. And they were really nice. They were made in Germany. Leica was made by Lights. Oh, let's see. I gotta consult my notes here. It was made by Lights Wechsler Company, and the Leica name came from the first 3 letters of Leica, or from Lights, with the CA on it. I guess that's what it was. But anyway, it came out Leica, and it's been the Leica company ever since. Okay, this is a 3F. This is made in about the middle 30s, and it was considered to be a great camera. It has one unique feature, was it had collapsible lenses, so that you could take that and easily, if you had a big coat pocket, you could stick it in your coat pocket. So it was a very compact thing, very high precision. It had a focal plane shutter, which means that they could go up to speeds of 1,000th of a second. And it was all 35 millimeter. And there was a lot of 35 millimeter cameras made. And then after the war, another country entered into the picture as a dominating force, and that was Japan, and that was with Canon and with Nikon. And since I been a Nikon user since the 60s, I'm going to show you Nikon stuff naturally, because that's what I have the most of. This camera here, I bought in the 60s when I started working for a newspaper in Mesa, and it had what's called photomic, and it had a metering system in it, so that you could, when you hold it up to your eye, you could meter the thing. And that was one of the other popular things about Nikon. Some of the other cameras had meters on them, but you had to do it separately, or at least when you weren't watching. But you could actually do everything through the viewfinder. Now, one of the unique things about the Nikon brand itself, and why I had stuck with the brand for so long, is this is a digital, my digital 810, and it has a huge lens on it. But one of the nice things about this is I can take the camera off this old Nikon F from the 60s, and it goes right onto and so I can still use this as a manual lens. It doesn't autofocus and it doesn't do anything else, but it's a good manual lens. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of people stuck with Nikon. Now, another thing that was really nice is that a single lens reflex you could use as a easy, simple camera, or you could buy some glass, as people call it. This is a real beast. it's a zoom lens, and it goes from 80 to 200 millimeter, and it's an f2.8. This is a very popular sports lens. It manual focus, so if you use it to shoot football, which we often did, you'd have to be real dead critical sharp focus and fast. So that was one of the things about the Nikon. They also came up with some smaller versions, cheaper versions. The Photomic was, I believe it was $490. And that was a lot of money then. That was probably a month's wage. So they came out with some other things. They wanted to incorporate the people that wanted to have a good camera, a real high quality camera, and still be able to use all the same lenses, but they still wanted to make it so that, you know, you didn't have to, like this, you can interchange many of the pieces. For instance, you can interchange the Photomic system on here, and this comes right off. And then you put a viewfinder on there. Well, not everybody needed that. So what they did, they came out with the F series, and it was a regular 35 millimeter. It did have an easy to open back 35 millimeter. Again, these are all basically 35s, but it didn't have some of the other features. Now, one of the unique features about Nikon, they thought of everything. They came out with a motor drive. I just happen to have one here. This is a motor drive that fits on the F series. You take the back off the F, you put this on. It holds a 250 exposure roll of film. So when you're shooting, you can go up to 4 frames a second. And when you're shooting sports, it was an amazing thing. You could shoot your lunch money's worth of film in no time at all. But this was a roll film back but as you can see, not everybody would need one of those. But the good sports photographers, they'd have them. Okay, let's see. If we go to the lights, now the Leica's cameras were what's called a rangefinder camera. The Nikons were single lens reflex. In other words, when you view through here, you're actually viewing through the lens, so you see exactly what you're getting. So they had a little competition, and people would say, well, I don't want a Leica because I want to do some close-up stuff, and I want to do some other things. I want to put some telephoto lenses on. They came out with this device here, which you attach the camera to, put it on a tripod, and this has a long telephoto lens. This is an old Cook lens, and what it has a device here to where you can go and you focus on this ground glass, you attach the camera here, and then you go and switch it. So and then take the picture. You don't actually see what you're going to get until you slide the image back and see this part. So that was one of unique things that they did to counteract the single lens reflex. Now the single lens reflex has always been a very popular camera because you can put different kinds of lenses on them and so forth without any other kind of adapting. Okay, at the same time, I'll set this down here. This is a lot of German cameras were made, and there was an Exacta corporation made the Exacta camera. Now, an unfortunate thing happened. It was called World War II. And the Exacta corporation happened to be in the eastern part of Germany. And so when the war was over, they became part of the Russian occupation, or East Germany. And here's a single lens reflex. These are unique cameras. Exacta made the Exacta. This is a VX2A, and it's made in Dresden, which is in Eastern Germany. And it's unusual because it's a single lens reflex camera, but it is left-handed. And what I mean by that is you cock it with the left hand and you shoot it with the left hand. And one of the things that a lot of photographers had difficulty with is they were right-handed. However, the left-handed photographers loved it because it was a unique thing. This camera has interchangeable lenses, and you can take the lens off and put on different lenses. Mishler made a camera in the 60s that used the same mount as the Exacta, and they made some pretty good lenses for it. One of the other things is this is the last film camera that Nikon made for the amateur market or semi-professional market. It's called an N90S, and what it is, it's a 35 millimeter camera with a focal plane shutter. It's very similar to the one that I showed you here, except that it is a little bit more of a computerized camera. For instance, it has a automatic lens, and it does an autofocus. So you can autofocus this. And this was the camera that I bought just before they came out with digital. And later I went kicking and screaming into the digital age. Okay, well, other professional cameras they used, some weren't just 35, some were larger formats. This is a Super Icona B. This was, looks like one of the older folding cameras, yet this was made by Zeiss Icon, and it was used as a professional camera. It has a rangefinder, and it wasn't a single lens reflex, but there were a lot of these that were used too in commercial ventures. As I said, this was one that my dad used, and the difference about this camera is that it made 2 1/4 by 3 1/4, 8 exposures on a roll, and it made a larger format. So if you're going to make large photographs, this was a good way to use it. Okay, another thing that came along is that Kodak got into the picture too, and this is a retina reflex. This is the Retina Reflex S, and they had a different concept. Now, Zeiss had a camera called the Contaflex, and it didn't have, it had interchangeable lenses, but it had what was called complementary lenses. In other words, they designed the lenses so that the rear element was the same in each one of them, and they had a shutter in the center rather than a focal plane shutter. Okay, they had a lens, they designed the lenses so that they would have the rear element the same as the all 3 lenses. So you had a telephoto lens like this, and a wide angle lens. This is a 28 millimeter wide angle, which is a pretty good wide angle lens for that. And it was a unique camera because it was still a single lens reflex. You could, the only restriction is that you had to buy the Kodak lenses for it. No one made other lenses. For the Nikon and for the other things, you had other lens companies that would come up and they'd make the lenses for them. Don't go away, we'll be right back. Everybody has one of these, but before these, we had box cameras that had film. It's a little 10x. I tell you what, next time we do this, if you could stay awake instead of snoring, that would be great. Hi, we're back. That didn't take long. What I wanted to show you is, okay, Kodak really invented the 35 millimeter film, and they had this little Pony 135 camera, but they never did have any what you call professional 35 millimeter cameras. They did a lot of they made a lot of the film and everything else, but they never really got into the professional stuff. But for the high amateur, or the, I'm sure you'll recognize this. This is an AE1. This is a Canon. Oh, everybody says, oh, I remember I had a Canon AE1. Well, this is one. It was interchangeable lenses, and it was comparable with the Nikon series, and a lot of semi-professionals and professionals use the AE1. There was also Mamiya had a camera, a single lens reflex camera, that was in competition with the Nikon and the Canon also, and I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, I remember that. My dad had one. This is a Pentax. This is a K1000. And it is a single lens reflex. So we had a lot of different companies that got into the market to sell to the people that wanted to spend, say, instead of $400 or $500 for a camera, they wanted to spend $100 or $200 on a camera, but still have the versatility of having the single lens reflex with interchangeable lenses. Now, some of the people just wanted nice 35 cameras to shoot things like slides, and we'll talk about slides a lot later. But Yashica came into the market, and they had an electric eye, and what it would do is automatically set the aperture so that most of your pictures would come out looking pretty good. Also, Zeiss Icon made this camera during the 70s. It's a little 10X, and what it did, it had a little meter on the top, and you could set the meter and it would be pretty much automatic. But they wanted to make high quality images at a low cost, and so this is the way to do it. Okay, the Agfa Selectra had an automatic feature here, and it was an automatic camera. It had a meter in it that would, electric eye is what they called it, and if you look here, it was either on automatic or you could turn it around and you could select your own f-stops like that. And in the viewfinder, there's a little spot in the corner there, and if it was green, you were okay to take a picture. If it was red, you had to either get more light or less light or something. Anyway, some of the companies came out with really economical stuff. This is called a motor drive, tele-free, and this is a Vivitar. Vivitar makes a lot of lenses. They made a few cameras too. And it had a little switch here. You could do telephoto or you could do regular. So that was the kick on this. And it had a plastic body, and it was shot regular 35 millimeter film, but it was an inexpensive way to make really pretty good quality pictures. It was a viewfinder camera. It wasn't a rangefinder camera because it was all fixed focus, and it was a a pretty good camera for what it did. Voigtlander. The Voigtlander company started in about 1756. It was not with photography, but they made instruments and things like that. So they made precision stuff. And the Voigtlander camera, and later on, when photography became popular, this was made during the late 60s, early 70s, and this is a Vitessa T. And what it would do is you could take and advance the film this way and take the picture this way. So it was kind of a unique little camera. It was also a rangefinder camera, and it had a manual setting. It had an electric eye and a meter here on the top. And you use that to set the f-stop and the shutter speed. So it was a pretty neat little camera. Voigtlander quit making cameras, I think in the 80s, because it was a lot of competition. Okay, the next thing I want to go to is I'm going to clear some of this out, and we're going to go to the other side of the spectrum, which was the 2.25 cameras, or the twin lens reflex. These are the single lens reflex, most of these, and we're going to the twin lens reflex. So be right back.
Women, we've all been there, every month. However, have you ever stopped to think what it might be like for a woman living on the street? A woman without enough money for those monthly essentials? Well, this will make you see red. In the city of Tempe alone, there are over 600 homeless. Over 30% are women. Every month, these women need basic feminine hygiene products, which average about $20 a month. Yet most public facilities do not provide these basic needs without a charge. So how can you help? Visit our website at womenforwomentempe.org, where you can donate money through PayPal, volunteer to help assemble bags at one of our packing parties, or purchase items from our Amazon wish list. You can also like us on Facebook and spread the word to your friends.
I wish more people supported this program because it does a lot of help.
Thank you so much for the feminine hygiene products. Out here on the streets, it's hard to come up with the funds from $5 to $8 for a box, and the hand wipes that we get, it definitely makes it easier to be a woman out here and homeless. Thank you so much, Women for Women.
With knowledge comes responsibility. Now that you know, how will you respond? Women for women. Dignity, health, period.
Okay, we're back. And one thing I mentioned is that there was a transition between the large format 4x5 cameras and things like that to the smaller 35 millimeter and 2.25 cameras. And the reason for that is the film improved, enlargers became easier to use and better, and it just became a lot lighter to carry along a camera like this than it was the 4x5. You could shoot 12 exposures on a roll, whereas you'd have to have 6 film holders on the 4x5 camera. So it made a big difference. Now the Rolleiflex was a really, really unique camera because you could use it as a sports camera like this and pre-focus at whatever it was, and you could use it to shoot sports, or you could use it with the ground glass and really focus in on that. The Rolleiflex had a lot of attachments that you could do. For instance, you could also open the back. They have a plate that goes in here, and you could actually put 35 millimeter film in here. So that made it a really, really handy kind of thing, because you could still shoot 35, and it gave you, this has a 75 millimeter lens, which gives you a slightly telephoto. So if you want to shoot portraits, which I will explain that I did in Tucson, the Rolleiflex itself started in the, probably in the 30s, early 30s. This is a Rolleiflex standard, what they call a standard. There weren't many of these made. And this camera here, or one like it, Robert Capa, the war photographer during World War II, started using this and used this all through the war. So it was a very, very much of a workhorse. It was easy to use, and it made a nice image size. Rolleiflex also made a more inexpensive version of their camera, the Rolleicord. It didn't have a crank. The Rolleicord has a crank on the side, and the Rolleicord has a knob you turn. When I was working in Tucson, I shot home portraits. I had a home portrait studio in Tucson in the early 60s. And we would go from house to house taking pictures of kids. I had these portable backdrops you'd set up, and you'd sit on the couch, and you'd get the kids. And we had a flash bracket that had the flash right over the lens, so you'd drop the shadows down below. And we shot everything on Kodachrome. And we had a 35 millimeter adapter in there. So we'd shoot 35 millimeter film. And with the 75 millimeter lens, it made a nice perspective. So it was a nice little camera, and yet you didn't spend a lot of money on it. Now, Kodak also made a twin lens reflex. This was made in the early 50s. And one of the things that Rolleiflex did is they figured out a way in which they could, you just drop a roll of film in and close the door and crank it up to the frame one. Well, with their patented pincher roller would sense when the tape came through, and then that was when it would stop. Kodak didn't have that advantage. They still had to use the red window. The problem with the red window is that panchromatic film was sensitive to all colors, including red, and so they had a little door here that would open that, turn it to number 1, close it, and then take a picture. The Kodak camera was quite a bit less expensive than the Rolleiflex, or it was in the price range of the Rolleicord, but it really never did take off as much as the Rolleis, because it was really high quality made. After the war, Japan, as I mentioned, came into the market, and here's a Yashica mat, and there's a lot of soldiers that brought home Yashica mats when they were stationed overseas, and it's very similar to the size of the Rolleicord or the Rolleiflex, and it had all the features. This one happens to have a meter in it, so that you can see the meter scale here, and this was a pretty neat little camera too. It was about half the price, or even maybe less than that, of the Rolleicord or Rolleiflex. Now, another camera that was made is a Voltaflex. This was not a very well-known camera, but it was still made in East Germany, or pardon me, it was made in West Germany, and it had a lot of the same features as the other cameras, and it was a lesser price because it had a crank knob rather than a wind knob. It also had a unique feature to where you have arrows in here. You load the film, you bring it up to the arrow, close the door, and then you would go and take the picture, or wind the film to the number one to take the picture. Okay, Minolta and Mamiya came up with an idea that they wanted to have a interchangeable lens camera. Now, many of the Rolleicords and Rolleiflexes, they had adapters that would go on there, but the image quality was never as good as it was with a real live lens. So Mamiya came up with this, and what you could do is change the lens. And they made a telephoto, a wide angle, and a normal lens. And it was very easy to change. The thing is, this was almost as heavy as a 4x5 camera. So it was, it's a good piece. It's a good camera. Now, speaking of weight, this is the camera that went to the moon. Well, this isn't exactly the camera, but it was one made by Hasselblad. And the difference between this is it had a motor drive on here and a larger film load, and but it was made by the same Swedish company that went to the moon, and it's probably the only manufacturer that can say that they have been to the moon. Now, one of the nice things about the Hasselblad is that it had an interchangeable back. So the back comes off very easily, and you can, it also has interchangeable lenses. You just take the, unscrew the lens. They're very quick to change. So what you do is you have a basic box, and you can interchange the lens, the back, and also the hood. Now this camera belonged to a very dear friend of mine who passed away, and his family gave this to me for my collection, and I really kind of cherish it. But the one thing about the Hasselblad, it had a nice crank on the side, and it's a well-made machine. It's really high quality. Now the fact is that they make a digital back for this, and you can actually convert this camera from film by just changing the back to digital. They also make a digital camera, and it's a high quality but extremely expensive. Now Hasselblad also made a super wide. Now, one of the problems with wide angle lenses on the Hasselblad was you could only go to a certain lens, maybe around 55 millimeter, 58 millimeter lens, because of the distance of the body here. So their solution was make a short body. This is about 1 inch. And this has, if you look in here, you can see the back of this 38 millimeter Biogon lens is very close to the film plane because it's very wide. And this is a single lens reflex camera. The wide isn't, because there's no room for the mirror in there. So it has a viewfinder on top that you use, and it gives you a pretty good angle pretty good view of what the cameras are going to see. Now, in Japan, they said, oh, Hasselblad makes a pretty good camera. But so Calamar came up with the idea that they're going to make a Calamar single lens reflex that takes 3 different lenses, a wide angle, a telephoto, and a normal lens. It also has a bellows attachment that you can put on and do real close-ups. I'll show you how this is a custom case that was made for me. This is a camera that I used in college in art when we went to art school. So it was it's a pretty neat little camera, and it has a screw mount lens, As you can see, it takes a lot longer to take this lens off than it does the Hasselblads. And you can put on a bellows attachment so that you can go and do a real short distance. You can do close-ups and things like that. Again, it's a single lens reflex camera. This was about 1/10 the price of a Hasselblad. The whole kit, I believe it was less than $300. And one of the lenses for the Hasselblad was about that price. So that was the difference between that. But it still makes a pretty good image. It's not the same quality as the Hasselblad, but it was a camera that fit the job. Well, we've kind of talked about this transition today. I hope you've enjoyed seeing the cameras from my collection. And I tell you what, next time I'm going to take you to the movies. So until then, it's photography before digital, and we're doing it through Larry's lens.
Awesome. Right. And this, that's really cool. So what other top would you put on this? A different kind of viewfinder?
Oh yeah, there's a different kind of viewfinder you can. In fact, I have. Oh, let's see. Do I have one in here? Oh, here's another lens.
Wow.
I've got 5 lenses for this.
That's awesome.
And let's see. I think this. Let's see. I'm just learning how to use these things.